Today we take a look at two hostage-taking situations. One in 1970 involving a hijacking of a ferry on the Seto Inland Sea, and the other, the 1979 hostage situation in an Osaka bank. Both end in similar fashion, with the culprits succumbing to fatal injuries by police, which is a very rare situation in Japan. These are pretty much the two only cases known. So first, the Seto Inland Sea, the area separating three major parts of the Japan Islands. Captain Fumihifa Nakamukai, on May 13, 1970, was forced to take his ferry, named Prince, on a wild ride. Fumihifa complied because, he had a rifle shoved in his face by a 20-year-old man, Nobuhisa Kawafuji, with the demand of sailing to any big city. The two of them, along with 37 passengers and various crew members, traveled for over 100 miles over the course of nearly 2 days. But let's go back to May 11th, as Kawafuji started a crime spree that would go on for a few days. May 11th, around 12:20 a.m., Kawafuji and two unidentified young adults travel along the National Highway 2 from Fukuoka to their destination of Hiroshima. But why so far? No one knows for sure, and perhaps we may never know. The car they were traveling in was a stolen vehicle. Somewhere in Sanyo-cho, the three were pulled over by police, and one of the three was forced into a police car to head back to Onoda Police Station. The car was stashed with hunting rifles, and the two men aimed their guns at the officer, forcing him to stop the vehicle. It was then that Kawafuji stabbed the officer with perhaps a hunting knife, seriously injuring him. The two then escaped on foot while the injured officer reported the situation. The third unidentified man was quickly taken into custody. During the early hours of May 11th, Kawafuji and the other stole another vehicle and set course for Ube City, where they were able to change outfits in hopes of losing the police. From there, the two boarded a train and got off at Yokogawa Station. Police had been blocking off the surrounding areas, though, and conducting searches, so the two could no longer continue by train. So instead, they retreated up into the local mountainous residential area. Ironically, they hid out near the Futaba Peace Pagoda. It was then at noon the police were informed by a concerned bystander that two sketchy-looking men carrying rifles were traveling along this area, so the police began to spread out. At about 2:50 p.m., Kawafuji was spotted traveling in a transport truck, taking the driver as a hostage. Police were forced to throw down their weapons, and Kawafuji escaped into the city center. Details are scarce, but the other accomplice was arrested sometime between noon and this Kawafuji sighting. He had been apparently hiding out somewhere near and was arrested after fighting an officer. So now Kawafuji was alone in the city center, and at about 4 p.m., he robbed a gun dealer, taking more rifle ammunition and shotguns. He then escaped by taxi and traveled to Ujina port, as he quickly took over the aforementioned Prince ferry, taking the captain, crew, and passengers as hostage. At this point, you begin to wonder, was Kawafuji still in control? Obviously things were going wrong, but some could argue it was at this point that Kawafuji lost all control, as his decisions were then frantic, with no direction or goal in mind. He wanted to escape, but couldn't. So they traveled along the Seto Inland Sea. The prince was trailed by all sorts of Coast Guard and police boats. Kawafuji began to shoot at the following boats, managing to strike a police officer in the chest, injuring him greatly. He also shot at innocent bystanders and even a Cessna plane. Helicopters were then dispatched, and eventually the news chapters followed. Japan was now able to witness the remaining hours of this pursuit live on television. At 9:40 p.m., the prince docked at Matsuyama port. In exchange for the removal of the passengers, the prince was refueled, and a few hours later, at 12:50 a.m., the ferry set sail to Imabara City, and then again changed back to Ujina port. Maybe it was the anxiety of the situation, the lack of sleep, who knows, but Kawafuji ended back exactly where they first set sail. 8:50 a.m., Kawafuji demanded the return of his arrested accomplice, but was denied, and at this point his own sister and father pleaded for him to stop all of this nonsense and turn himself in, to no avail. Kawafuji became more frustrated and shot wildly at the police, injuring yet another cop. These moments were caught on video and captured by cameras. The situation was getting more out of hand, and police had to put an end to the situation quickly. He obviously wasn't giving up as he became more and more violent, so a hard choice was made. Shoot, even if it means killing. So snipers took aim and waited for their chance for Kawafuji to return to the deck. At 9:52 a.m., Kawafuji did return to the deck unarmed, yelling at the police officer, and then was shot in the chest by a police sniper. This moment was captured on the news, and if you really want to see that, there's a link in the description. A few hours later, he was pronounced dead at a local hospital. Quite a few officers were injured, but there was only one casualty, Kawafuji. An interesting side note, the Prince ferry was sold to a Philippine company and used as a tourist boat. I can't find any follow-up information on the other two men arrested, or any background information on Kawafuji. The entire situation did have a major impact on the Japanese police force. This was one of the very first cases of police killing a perpetrator in a post-war Japan. As a result, the police involved in the shooting were questioned and ridiculed. Obviously, many people felt it was a justified killing. As for the motive of this whole hostage situation, I feel it's obviously a robbery gone wrong. We know their destination was Hiroshima, and we also know that they planned on killing any cops that got involved. It said they wanted to rob a jewelry store, but that arrest on May 11th ruined those plans. There wouldn't be another police-involved killing until 1979 during another hostage situation. With the inland sea hijacking, we obviously saw a plan gone wrong with a stable yet frustrated man, though not much is known about his mental health. With this 1979 bank hostage situation, we see a much more demented individual in charge, and he had quite a history of disturbing moments. On January 26, 1979, Akiyoshi Umekawa invaded a Mitsubishi bank in Sumiyoshi, Osaka. What followed was a bizarre standoff that lasted days, leaving 4 dead, 5 including Umekawa. But what makes this case disturbing is that this was a man who should have never had the opportunity to do what he did. As a child, he had issues with his father. His parents were divorced, and he always preferred staying with his mother, maybe because he could get away with more things. As school history shows, he often got into fights with rival schools. At the age of 15, a terrible event unfolded, and the outcome is shocking, to say the least. 23-year-old Ako struggled against Umekawa in a robbery attempt. She was killed. Ako's money was stolen as a result. Somehow, police were able to detain Umekawa, not sure what evidence led them to him, but he spent almost 2 years in a juvenile detention center. But that's it. He was let go, despite officials of the facility claiming he was a child with severe issues that would probably never be cured. But alas, as a youth, he was barely punished for such a horrific crime. Crazy, isn't it? In 1973, he bought 2 shotguns that would later be used for his hostage takeover, which occurred in 1979 when he was 30 years old. It seems as though he had this planned for a week or two, according to police descriptions, but what ensued certainly didn't seem to be someone with a plan. This is a bit of a long crime. It plays out in 3 days, with the majority of time being nothing too noteworthy, but I listed some key moments. So Friday, January 26th, at about 10 a.m., Umekawa left his home in Osaka, never to return. He ran a few typical errands, and at about 1:30 p.m. he parked his vehicle in Tezukayama, where he changed into clothes, the disguise you see here. From there, he left his vehicle and boarded the nearby train and got off by the Mitsubishi Bank in Sumiyoshi, Osaka. At 2:30 p.m., he enters the first floor of the bank with 2 shotguns, firing at the ceiling. He demanded 50 million yen from a clerk at the counter. Many of the employees and customers managed to either escape the building or hide in other parts of the bank. However, Umekawa threatened to kill an employee if anyone else attempted to run away. One counter clerk attempted to make an emergency call and was killed, while another employee was injured. When the customers who managed to escape stopped a nearby police officer to inform him of the situation. At 2:34, a police officer enters the bank. The officer calls for him to drop his weapons, but instead taunts the officer to shoot, which he did, but missed, perhaps on purpose. Regardless, Umekawa returned fire and shot the officer. As he lay dying, he called out to the hostages to call 110 for help. One person who managed to escape calls the police. A few minutes later, another officer enters, but is quickly shot and killed. At 2:40 p.m., another officer attempts to shoot Umekawa but missed and backs off. Clerks are forced to close the shutters to this first floor. As that officer leaves, he manages to block the shutter from shutting completely, as you can see here. The second shutter isn't shut completely, leaving a gap. A lieutenant enters the first floor, but is shot at. Luckily for him, his vest stopped the bullet. At 2:45, all sorts of police and chiefs gather outside the bank, staking out at the second floor to begin an interrogation. At this time, the first dead officer's pistol is retrieved by a clerk who was ordered by Umekawa to get it. The other officer's pistol is retrieved eventually too. In a strange turn of events, Umekawa begins to release hostages and will do so throughout the entire process, sometimes in exchange for alcohol or food, other times because of injury or illness. At 2:50, the branch manager identifies himself and is shot dead. Umekawa bizarrely holds him responsible for the whole event. For the next hour, Umekawa lines up all the hostages that aren't hidden as police gather outside, surveying the building and strategizing. They will eventually drill in all sorts of peepholes to spy on Umekawa from the outside. At 4:46, Umekawa calls police and identifies himself and threatens to kill more if any other police officer enters that first floor.
모시모시 안 가나? 남매인 들어갔네. 왜? 버릇이가 그렇게 어때? 에? 누구 시켜들이 다대? 버릇이가 그렇게 왔대나?
He also orders various clerks to call the police with the same message.
모시모시犯人が横にいるわけですか?
At around 5:30, Umekawa orders female hostages to strip naked, but claims it to be a display of erotic art rather than any sort of perverted demand. He also begins to talk about the movie Salo, or the 120 Days of Sodomy. So let's take a break here. Umekawa was a lover of grindhouse-type films and other odd underground arts, but this movie, Salo, is a 1975 Italian film about, well, all sorts of debauchery involving children. It's banned in parts of the world, and it isn't the type of film you'd want to hear about as you're being forced to strip naked with a gun to your head. He even went as far as ordering a clerk to cut the ear off another as some sort of ritualistic reference to the film. 6:45, Umekawa orders food, and police begin to toy with the idea of poisoning the food with some sort of sleeping pill, but they never follow through with this. As you can see here in this footage, the police go back and forth from the first to second floor with their shoes off to make less noise. As all of this is going on, Umekawa fires off his guns at random intervals throughout the entire process. And by 9 p.m., news channels across Japan begin to broadcast the situation, while crowds begin to gather outside the bank, some yelling for the police to do more, while others attempt to enter the bank themselves. At 10:45, police officials decide to rush in at midnight that night. However, plans change once they look into a peephole and can see a line of hostages in front of Umekawa. The night goes into morning as more food is supplied and alcohol, with hostages exchanged. At 11 a.m., Umekawa's mother enters the scene, where he reads a note written by her. More demands are met throughout the day. And by 11 p.m. that night, 25 hostages remain. Throughout Sunday morning, many start to feel sick, and at 7:10 a.m., police have finally figured out what to do. The police gave Umekawa nearly 3 days to come up with something, anything. But the odd demands continued, his behavior never changed throughout the whole ordeal, and it was obvious he only waited for police to enter so he could possibly go out shooting. Through the peephole, they were able to determine the moment they'd strike. They ruled out all sorts of activities that would not work, as Umekawa always had a gun in hand. But he had been up for nearly 3 straight days, so police determined that when he would read the newspaper, he covers his face, and that's when they'd strike. And at 8:41, that's exactly what they did. There were no hostages in the way, so 6 officers rushed in and shot at Umekawa, hitting him 3 times in the face. At 11 a.m., a press conference was held, and a police official had this to say about the situation. Unlike the conventional hostage case, they had a hard time understanding the motive. They communicated numerous times by phone, but the behavior did not change from start to end. Perhaps he was confused by a lack of sleep, but they didn't want to take any chances, as he was firing off randomly throughout the whole process. And 4 were already killed, and many others were injured, so police felt the use of their weapons was justified. January 29th, a funeral is held for Umekawa, attended only by an uncle, his mother, and a priest.